Okay, hello everybody, again, it's me again. As promised, further updates. I'm going to tell you about Thomas. As I said before, that's not his real name, but I see his ascot today as well, and Kate and William are going to be in the leading carriage apparently, because the Queen's having a rest. I can't wait to see what Catherine wears. I love that, and I love that someone asked her, you know, it said to her, you're going to be a brilliant next Princess of Wales. So she will too, so she will. And also, if anyone works at the Daily Mail who watches these videos just by chance, or any of the newspapers, can't you guys do a bit of digging into certain Twitterati bullies? And I'm not going to name him, but there is a man I couldn't help but notice on Twitter who does reports and things like that. Can't you guys at the newspaper have a little dig into him and see where the money leads? Who's paying him? Because that would be a big headline. If you got a connection between him and you know who, oh boy, that would be world headline. So come on, whatever happened to investigative journalism? I know in my story, no one ever made the effort to really look into it. They used to contact me all the time and go, oh, we'll let you tell your side of the story, Fiona, but they never did. They just regurgitated the same stuff. And the reason is because I don't think it's like that so much these days with TikTok and YouTube, and people can get their side of the story out. But in the olden days, it was very much controlling the population. Like a lot of the TV people and media people used to say to me, we can't pay you any money because we're seen as promoting crime and criminals. And I thought, you cheeky monkeys. Anyway, so any investigative journalists out there, can you not make some paper trail connection money? I mean, come on. We see all these scandals come out years later and everybody says, how could everybody not have known? I think this is a living scandal at the moment. And one of you could be like a proper Watergate. I know we've got gate this, gate that, gate the other, but you could blow this one out of the water. Right, Thomas. Well, just in brief, I was very quiet a child after the kindergarten thing. I was like, shut up, stop gobbing off. So I thought, I'll just keep my head down and I'll do what I can, my best at school. So I did that. And I was actually very, very well behaved, very good child until I was about 13 or 14. And then it was just too much. It was because I was a good child, I think my parents took it for granted really a little bit and thought, I'll leave her to her own devices. That was like the worst thing to do. I had a terrible boyfriend when I was about 15. Oh, he was a nightmare. And that did bring trouble for my mum and dad, and I felt very bad about all of that. And the bastard actually burgled our home in the end, and that's another long story. I'll tell you all about that, because we went on holiday, and he did it while we were on holiday, and I had a dream that he'd done it. And I saw all the people involved in the dream, and I told my mum and dad, and they said, nonsense, no such thing as dreams. And when we got home, we found out. Police were absolutely useless over that one. Anyway, so I felt I'd caused my mum and dad a lot of trouble. So I went back to being very, very suppressed. Not good, but suppressed, like just trying to be something that I wasn't to please them. And I was in a relationship for about 4 years with a very nice lad, good-looking lad, very sweet, nothing wrong with him at all, but he wasn't what I wanted at all. And I couldn't get out of the relationship because my mum and dad kept sort of emotionally blackmailing me and saying, well, if you split up with him, it's all going to start again, which oddly enough is exactly what happened. Who knew? Anyway, he was very upset every time I said to him, it's got to finish. He said he'd kill himself and stuff like that, and I felt bad. So I got involved with, this is going to sound terrible, I got involved with a married man because I thought, if I have someone who's married, it's not a long-lasting situation, and I don't want to jump ship from one ship to another, or out of the frying pan and into the fire. So I thought this guy was the only person on my side at the time, and he was willing to listen and stuff. In fact, it's thanks to him I first came to Jib. He brought me to Jib. He was a lovely guy. He's dead now. Another one dead, unfortunately, cancer. Anyway, so I was the rights or wrongs of it. It's probably why I don't judge people, because I'm in no position, apart from Meghan Markle. Anyway, I'm not talking about her today. So my boyfriend at the time, he cottoned on there was someone else, and he kept, of course, saying, "Who is it? Who is it? Who is it?" So I made up a person that was the dead opposite of my married man. I said, well, firstly, he's young, which he wasn't. Secondly, he's from Birmingham. I don't know why I said that, but I did, because this married man was from Sussex. I said he was blonde, because this fella was dark. I said he was tall, and this fella was not short, but he was my height. So blonde, from Birmingham, tall, young. I said he was a sales rep. And the weirdest thing is, he said, what sort of car does he drive? And I said, oh, red Maestro. Right? I just made all that up off the top of my head, just to make the guy feel better. Anyway, the guy, he understood in the end, and I'm very glad to say that young man, well, he won't be a young man now, he'd be my age. He found a girl, found true love, and they started a family, and he's very, very happy. And he would never have been happy with me, never, because he wanted to settle down and have children, and I was 21, 22, and that was the last thing I wanted to do. I wanted to get out there. Well, you probably realised I'm a bit of a handful anyway. I think someone said that in the comments, and you're quite right. So, anyway, then I broke it off with the married man once I'd got out of this relationship, and that was fine. I only went out with the married man for about 8 weeks, you know. It's probably the naughtiest thing I've done, in my opinion. I think that's very, very naughty, and very, very bad thing to do. I'm very glad his wife never found out about it. Mind you, she was having quite a few. I'm not justifying anything, okay? Anyway, about 2 months later, I was working in this business centre in an office. This young man walked in, and he was tall, and he was blonde. I am not making this up. I mean, this is one of the weird things that's happened in my life. Super weird. Tall, blonde, Brummie, Birmingham accent. He was a sales rep. He'd come for a job with one of the tenants in my building, and he drove a red Maestro. How's that, eh? How's that for a weird coincidence? It's almost like by me making up all that shit and telling my ex-boyfriend that exact opposite description of the married man, I was almost writing my own book, which makes me feel there are people who've died, or there are people who've not now. I should take the Wi-Fi off this while I'm doing these. The WhatsApps that come thick and fast. It's almost like there's loads of dead people, and there's people, or there's some other universe, or there's something. Yeah, he had a red Maestro, and he was Thomas was the funniest person. He made me laugh more than anyone else I'd ever met, up until Graham. Graham makes me laugh a lot more, and Graham knew Thomas as well eventually. In fact, it was Graham who sort of said to Thomas in the end, I know you and Fiona have been best friends for 11 years and everything, and I love you, man. I really love you, Thomas, but you're gonna have to go. I'm sorry, you're too much trouble. Anyway, so I met this young Thomas, and he came into work one day and he said, oh, you'll never guess what, my car was stolen. My red Maestro, it was stolen. And I said, oh, that's terrible. He said, oh, and I didn't have insurance because I couldn't afford the insurance as well as the finance. Anyway, that evening, the front page of the Evening Argus, it said that there'd been a police chase with a red Maestro, car thieves, and they'd chased it all over Brighton, and they couldn't catch them. So I thought, oh, that'd be Thomas's car. Poor Thomas, I'll phone the police. So I picked the phone up, and they answered. And something in my head said, put the phone down, Fiona, it's none of your business. It's nothing to do with you. Don't do this. So I put the phone down, and I thought, I'll tell him. It's got to be his car. He came in to the office later on, and I told him I'd phoned the police, and I thought better of it, and I put the phone down. Well, the guy went white as a sheet, and that's when it came out. He said, well, it wasn't my car. It was me that had the police chase all over Brighton. Well, I know a lot of law-abiding citizens. Well, I would now. I'd say, look, you've got to sort yourself out. But I was 22. I just thought it was the most exciting thing I'd ever heard in my life. A car thief, a real live car thief. So, yeah, and Thomas was lovely, very charming, very gentle, not an ounce of violence in him, always dressed smartly, always in a business suit, and we had a lot in common because he was skint as well, and I was skint, but neither of us were the sort to let anybody see that. And I lost my job in the business centre because it was the recession, the early 90s recession. They were awful people, actually. And I did a very stupid thing. One of them, there'd been years of this nonsense going on, office politics, bullying in the workplace, and I was 22, and I'd only just come out of this sort of 4-year relationship with this guy who was very nice but a bit dull and very sort of goody two shoes. So I was in that, I was like a little mouse in a shell, and I didn't want to kick off. And I'd said to my mum and dad a few times, I don't like working at that place. I was there for 2 years, and I said I get bullied, and all they could, my mum used to say, oh, let it wash all over you. And my dad used to say, oh, it's all part of the rich tapestry of life, Fiona. In other words, don't bother us with your problems, Fiona, just carry on being nice and goody because you're not stressing us out. They didn't really care, but in the end there was always fights over the car park, private car park, and who parked where. And someone had parked in someone else's space, and as it turned out, it was one of my superiors who'd parked in their space, and someone had left a rude note on a cardboard on her car, and she came marching in, my superior at work, and she threw this cardboard note at me like a frisbee, and it hit me right there. And she said, tell fucking this company director I'll park where I fucking well like. Those were her exact words, and she marched out. And that was it. I left. I walked out. I just thought, I can't take another second of it. I've had 2 years of this bitch. There was her and another bitch and this horrible old dude, and I'm certain he's dead because he was about 183 when I was working there. And I didn't know anything about recessions, and apparently the early 90s recession had kicked in. There was a thing called Black Wednesday, and I'd heard it on the news. I didn't know what it was. Something to do with the ECB, the European Central Bank, and interest rates went up to, well, at one point I think they went up to 17%. They put them back down to 15 and then 12. Well, that was the beginning of the knackers for Brighton, all of us in Brighton and the south east. They talk about north-south divide. Well, that was a very levelling experience, and I didn't realise when I walked out that job, there'd be very little chance of finding another job. So there I was, out of work, and Thomas had moved in with me, and so we were right up Shit Creek without a paddle, and through his shenanigans, Sussex police came round, and it went on and on and on. Hello, you had a good day with the dolphins?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you brought a bottle of brandy and it's vinegar.
No.
Vinegar is amazing. If ever you're bitten by mosquitoes, Graham puts it in an atomizer, and kids complain. They were all complaining last night, oh, it smells like fish and chips. But it's brilliant. Mosquitoes hate it, and it's cheap. So that was Thomas. Thomas was a lovely, funny, kind, caring guy, but Graham used to call him Mr. Bot, because he'd bring us all on top, bang on top. That was my Thomas, and he's the one I actually, at one point, I went to the police and, more than once, I went to the police and confessed to crimes I hadn't committed, that he'd committed, because we knew for sure for him it would be jail, but for me, because I didn't have a criminal record. And luckily, God bless those police officers, they talked me out of it. They said, look, we'll give you a chance to take the statement back because we know you're covering for him. Thomas was more like my little brother in the end. I felt I had to look after him, and it really took Graham in the end to say, Thomas, you're a grown man and you're messing her life up and you've got to go. And when I found out it was him who'd thrown me in to scare it, of course, I said, don't ring again, don't ring again. I wish him well, whatever he's up to right now. I try and look him up on the internet. It doesn't look like he's doing any better with his life these days, but that's the way it is. So I'm going to go and have a look and see what Catherine's hat and dress is. And Camilla, actually. Camilla's growing on me a lot. I quite like some of her outfits and her clothes. So I'll leave you with that thought. And let's there's so many stories. I can't think where to begin. Oh, and a lot of you have said I must write a book. Well, I did. I wrote a book while I was on the run, which was a big mistake because the story hadn't ended. So I deleted that, and then I wrote another book in 2005, and I've still got it. But it's the thing with a book is you've got to find a publisher, and it's a lot of hard work. Even for someone like Lady Colin Campbell, you ask her, publishing, getting a book done, it's a big deal. And I actually prefer just being with you guys here on YouTube, because we're like a little club. We're a book club, aren't we? Or we're a swap your nightmare stories club. So tell me all your nightmares, as you know, below in the comments, and I'll see you later. Following on from that saga, finding out about Thomas, I'd lost my job. I'd never been on the dole in my life. I mean, my parents, if they'd known, I don't know that my dad ever did find out, but my mother, of course, did, because she died when she was 84, 2014. My dad died in 1995. I think I polished him off, actually, really, and I loved my dad. Anyway, I didn't want them to know, because they'd sort of said, once you're out of this stable relationship with someone who you might not like, but we think he's good for you, it'd be downhill from there, Fiona, and it was. So the last thing I wanted them to know was that I was out of work, and even worse, I mean, when Thomas said, well, you've got to go the dole, you've got to apply for the dole, and I was like, no, never, I just can't. You know, what will my parents say? Well, eventually he said, well, you've paid into the system, and you're entitled to unemployment benefit, which was the case in those days, and they'd give you 6 months unemployment benefit because you'd worked, and I'd worked all my life in factories and offices and stuff. So I claimed they give you a green thing called UB40, you know, like after the singers. But then after the 6 months, that finished, and there was no more money. Now, by this time, Thomas had introduced me to quite a few other people. There was quite a set of us, and they were people who'd been born under horrible disadvantage, and they were up to all sorts of stuff. Anyway, they said to me, you've got to go down and apply for something called income support. So I went down to the job centre and asked them, and because it was the recession, the queue for the dole was out the door and down the seafront. I mean, it was awful. And after queuing for ages, I spoke to a lady, and she said it's a very big form, and it's only for people who really need it. And you, to me, don't look like someone who really needs it, because like I say, I was still wearing all my office clothes, and I was going for job interviews because I wanted to get another job as soon as possible, and there were none. So she said I wouldn't bother if I were you, and I took her advice, and I didn't bother, because she said I'd be a burden. And I thought, well, I am. That's what my parents would think. I'll be a burden. So me and Thomas, we lived without money for 6 months. And the way we survived was, he still got a bit of dole money, but that dried up. And he used to go shoplifting. Bless him. It's terrible. I told you, don't feel too sorry for me. Yeah, go shoplifting, and the local supermarket managers were actually very, very nice about it. They caught him quite a few times, and they said, you know, why do you have to steal such a large packet of bacon? And he said, well, then I don't have to come back for the rest of the week. They never phoned the police on him because everybody was doing it, and they were like, we know this is... I didn't even know what a food bank was. They might have had food banks then. I don't think so. And I think that's why at supermarkets, when I see homeless people with no money, I say, you give me a list. I say that here in Spain. I say, dame una lista. ¿Qué quieres? Bebidas, comidas, or solo dinero? Which means, what do you want? You want a drink? You want something to eat? Or do you just want the money? And we do that all the time at Little and Aldi here, because I understand how it is. So in the end, he started nicking a block of cheese, and we could make a block of cheddar go 3 days between the two of us. And I swear to God, I dropped to about 5.5 stone. That was the lightest I was. My mother thought I had an eating disorder. They'd come down intermittently visiting from the Outer Hebrides, and she expected to see the fridge full, and when she didn't see food in the fridge, she'd say, oh, you're so irresponsible. This is so you, Fiona, because I pretended I had a job. It's talk about stress. She'd say, I'm coming down from Scotland, and me and Thomas and all our renegade crowd, it put the fear of God into us. We'd think, oh no, Joan Mont's coming down. Everyone would go on a shoplifting spree just to fill the fridge, just to shut her up, so she wasn't going on and on and on at me about it. And I had a car as well. I had a Montego, and I'd let Thomas drive it. Disqualified driver, of course no insurance, disqual driver, and he'd had a crash in it, and no one was hurt, thank God. Smashed the whole of the front of my car up. My mother said, I'm coming down to visit. Not only do I want to see that fridge full, I want to see the car. Well, I'm going to put a caveat in here, alright, because the Sussex police know all about this already, but I mean, whatever I say, this is all hypothetical, alright. So Thomas found another car that looked just like my old car, and he put the number plates on it. He sourced it, he borrowed it from somewhere, okay. So my mother comes round, she says, there's not enough food in the fridge. I said, oh, well, I haven't had a chance to go shopping. I'll go. No, she said, I'm going to take you to the supermarket now. We're going to go and buy food now. And I said, oh, what, in your car? No, she said, I want to see the car. You can take me in the car. Well, I had this car that Thomas had borrowed. So, as a subterfuge, it wasn't exactly the same. I just thought she'd want to go and look at it, but oh no, she wanted a lift to the supermarket to buy me food. And she said, I'll fill it up with petrol. At a petrol station with a load of cameras. Well, I mean, it was only borrowed, it wasn't like it was stolen or anything. Make what you will of that. And so I had to. Thomas's face, my dad said, I'll stay here in the flat with Thomas. Keep him company while you take your mother. She'll fill your car up and get you shopping. And that's what we did. We went to the petrol station. She filled the tank up. So when we gave the car back, because we did give the car back. We put the car back where it belonged. And she got this food from the supermarket. And we were at the traffic lights, and the old bill pull up next to me. So I'm sitting there like that, talking to my mother, the ex-leader of East Sussex County Council. Oh my God, can you imagine? It was a borrowed car, it wasn't a stolen car, right? But it wouldn't have looked good, and it wouldn't have, my father would have died, just dropped down dead on the spot, and probably my mother too. Shit, do you know, I don't think I ever told her that to the day she died. Anyway, we put the car back to the person that we borrowed it from in the first place. And we had no money, and the shoplifting continued. And I'd been checking for jobs a lot in the local paper, and I saw a job that said chauffeur wanted, as long as you've got your own car. Well, Thomas had found a very unusual car on a forecourt which had the keys in the ignition and the doors unlocked, and it was like that for weeks, because I think the car sales place was hoping somebody would take it so they could claim on the insurance. You know, such was the stuff that was going on in Brighton at the time. Everybody was going to the wall. Everybody. George Street, Hove, they were like tumbleweeds going down it. I think we had the Co-op and the Woolwich Building Society in the end. All the others were foreclosed. All the shops were shut. So eventually, I said to him, I wouldn't go near it. I think it's a honey trap. I think it's a rat trap that the police have set up. Well, he couldn't resist, and it was only round the corner from where my flat was, so he took it, and they never said anything. And Sussex police know all about this. That car was never reported stolen. So it must have... God knows what that was all about. Anyway, I'd been there for a few weeks, and I saw this job, and I thought, well, I know where the keys are, and it's £150 a week, and it's a wage, and it's a job. And so I applied for the job, and I took the car along, and I got the job. And I had that job for a couple of months. He was a lovely guy I worked for, actually. And it all came to a sticky end, and Sussex police, you know, found out all about that. I don't have a criminal record. I had a few Crown Court trials, and I was found not guilty. Because they used to they figured throw enough mud and some will stick. But they were throwing the wrong mud in the wrong places. And well, anyway, yeah, they were aghast, actually, when they found that. And they said, well, what have you been doing with this car? I said, well, I got a job with it. They said, well, that's not what normal villains do. They don't normally get a job. I said, well, I needed a job. I want a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. And that's hard to come by in these times. And the old Bill sort of threw their hands up in the air and said, well, I've got to give it to you, Fiona. You have. You've been a hard worker. I got up every morning, crack of dawn, dressed up like a chauffeur, best chauffeur outfit, black leather gloves, and I took this fella off to Hampshire every day and brought him back in a knockoff. That's quite bad, actually, isn't it? Well, I'm glad Sussex Police know all about it. And there were a few other things that I'm not going to go into. And so, yeah, I suppose if people who have died look down on this, I suppose my mother knows that now. I suppose she knows all of it now. But yeah, isn't it amazing? And that all sort of came from fear of admitting to my parents or anybody that I was skint and I was starving. And we were starving. First pay packet I got from that chauffeur job, I went straight to the supermarket. Eggs, bacon, beans, toast, bread, butter, tea bags. Oh, I was in heaven. 150 quid a week. I was in absolute heaven. And when it all came badly on top with the chauffeur job, I was arrested and then I was released. And when I got back to my flat, 2 dole checks had landed for about 800 quid. I thought, oh, there's irony for you. After all that, there was money. People in Britain shouldn't starve.